What would you do if the world's richest man suddenly grabbed the mic and started singing? It wasn't meant to happen. That night in Austin, Texas, the ballroom at the Crescent Pavilion was buzzing with the kind of electric anticipation you only get when the world's most powerful people are in one room. The Tech Forward Gala had become an annual spectacle, a who's who of billionaires, venture capitalists, startup prodigies, and star-studded celebrities all under one shimmering glass ceiling. But no one came for entertainment. They came for deals, ideas, and maybe a few drinks before flying out on their private jets. And then there was Elon Musk, the headline name. The man who made rockets cool and cars quiet. Everyone expected a speech. Something inspirational. Maybe a dry joke or two. But definitely not music. As the night unfolded, the stage was lit with warm blues and golds, a soft jazz band played in the background. People were mingling, wine glasses clinking, the kind of murmuring hum of money and intellect. The MC, a sharp-witted ex-YouTuber named Kyle, took the stage to introduce the final speaker. And now, the man who's taking us to Mars and tweeting memes while doing it, Kyle said, grinning, please welcome, the one and only, Elon Musk. Applause broke out. Elon stepped onto the stage, wearing a tailored black suit with a slightly awkward smile. He looked exactly as you'd expect, calculated, composed, and maybe a little tired. But then Kyle leaned toward the mic again, eyes twinkling mischievously. Wait, Elon, before you talk space stuff, how about you sing us something, he said. Laughter erupted. A few people clapped sarcastically. It was clearly a joke. Elon smiled politely. He could have shaken it off, made a quip, and moved on. But instead, he paused. There was a strange silence. A ripple moved through the crowd as Elon turned to the band and whispered something. The pianist looked surprised. A few keys were tapped. A familiar melody began to play. Was that? Wait. Was this real? Elon Musk was about to sing. The audience leaned forward. Phones were raised. People whispered. This was not on the program. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from, the narrator of this very moment might say if it were a YouTube video. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Back to the stage. Elon stepped up to the mic, eyes scanning the crowd. He took a breath. And then, in a low and unexpectedly gentle voice, he began. She packed my bags last night, pre-flight. Gasps rippled through the room. 0 hour, 9 a.m. It wasn't perfect. His voice cracked slightly. There was a softness to it, an almost boyish quality. And yet, it wasn't funny anymore. The audience that had laughed just seconds ago was now frozen, hanging on every word. The band followed his lead, falling into rhythm, filling the room with that hauntingly beautiful melody, Rocket Man by Elton John. Somewhere in the back, a woman whispered, "Oh my God, he's actually good." Others stared, mouths slightly open. Elon didn't try to perform. He wasn't pretending to be a rock star. He didn't dance. He didn't even move much. He stood still, hands at his side, eyes cast down. Vulnerable. Almost human. That was the moment it changed. The man the world had labeled as a tech robot, a meme king, a cold genius, was singing with the voice of someone who had spent his whole life buried in ideas and finally wanted to feel something. And for the first time, the audience didn't see SpaceX or Tesla. They saw Elon. Real Elon. As the final notes echoed through the glass ceiling, Elon closed his eyes and let out a small breath. There was a second, just a second, of silence. And then, the room erupted. Not with polite clapping. Not with curious laughter. With a standing ovation. It started in the front row. A sharp slap of hands. Then another. Then a cheer. A whoop. Chairs scraped back as people rose, clapping, some even whistling, others just looking stunned. This wasn't admiration for vocal skill, it was something deeper. People were applauding the risk. The heart. The courage it took for the world's most watched man to be unexpectedly real in a world that worships control. Elon stood there, half smiling, as if surprised by the reaction. He didn't bow. He just nodded and whispered, almost to himself. Wasn't expecting that. The MC returned, visibly speechless. Well, he said, laughing nervously, guess you don't need auto-tune when you're headed to Mars. Laughter followed, but this time it was warm, not mocking. The crowd sat down again, but the atmosphere had shifted. People weren't thinking about investments anymore. Or technology. Or money. They were thinking about something human. Something vulnerable. Something they hadn't expected. That night, the story spread like wildfire. By morning, clips of Elon's performance were on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Reddit, everywhere. #Elon Sings trended worldwide. But none of those videos could capture the full electricity of the moment. You had to be there. You had to see it. Because something rare had happened. A man who had built empires from code, concrete, and vision, had, in a moment of vulnerability, reminded the world that even rocket men have souls. If you only know Elon Musk from headlines, you'd think he was born wearing a spacesuit, tweeting out code, and flipping electric cars like pancakes. But that's just the man on stage, the face of a trillion-dollar future. Behind the curtain. It's a lot quieter. And a lot lonelier. Elon grew up in Pretoria, South Africa, in the late 1970s, a wiry, pale kid with a strange name and stranger ideas. His father was an engineer. His mother, May, was a model and dietitian with the warmth of a lioness. They divorced when Elon was young. The house grew cold after that. Cold, and loud. His father's voice was sharp. The walls held on to echoes of arguments too big for a child to understand. Elon, then just 9, found refuge in books. He devoured entire encyclopedias, reading not because he had to, but because the outside world felt unbearable. And when he wasn't reading, he was listening. There was one cassette tape he played until it wore thin. Queen's "Somebody to Love." That voice, Freddie Mercury's aching cry, the swelling harmonies, the pain in every note, it hit him in a place deeper than logic. It made him feel seen. And for a boy who rarely felt seen, it was everything. Elon didn't talk much in school. He didn't fit in. The other boys thought he was weird, too smart, too intense, too quiet. They bullied him. Pushed him down concrete stairs. Beat him until his face turned blue and his lungs couldn't pull in air. May remembers the day she picked him up from the hospital. She held his hand and whispered, "You don't have to be loud to be heard." That stuck with him. Not just that day, but forever. He taught himself programming at age 10. Sold his first game, Blaster, at 12. While other kids were throwing footballs and sneaking into movies, Elon was building futures inside a screen. But even then, even buried in silicon and code, music stayed with him. On long nights alone, headphones wrapped around his ears like armor, he would loop David Bowie's Space Oddity over and over. Ground Control to Major Tom. The lyrics weren't just about space. They were about isolation. About drifting, detached, in a world you don't fully understand. It wasn't hard to relate. When Elon moved to Canada at 17, then to the US, the silence followed him. He worked like a machine. Stanford dropout. Zip2. PayPal. Tesla. SpaceX. Neuralink. Twitter. Always the next thing. Always building. 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 But never stopping. The media loved the myth, the Iron Man, the mad genius, the real-life Tony Stark. But few saw the man behind the myth. The one who ate ramen alone. The one who slept under his desk. The one who kept playlists of melancholic synthpop on loop because somehow, the artificial sounds felt more human than people ever did. There were relationships, of course. Public ones. Private ones. A few happy, many fractured. He loved deeply, but struggled to show it in ways people expected. His mind worked differently. Grimes, the artist who shared a son and some chaotic years with him, once said in an interview, "People don't get him. He feels things, but it's like a circuit board. You have to wait for it to light up." She wasn't wrong. Then came the pressure. The fame. The expectations. Every word analyzed. Every facial twitch dissected. If he smiled too much, he was faking it. If he didn't smile at all, he was a sociopath. The world wanted a show. But Elon? He just wanted to build things that mattered. Still, late at night, when even Twitter was quiet, he would sit in his living room, lights dimmed, and play music from a small, dusty record player he kept in the corner. Not for anyone else. Just for him. And that's what made that moment at the Tech Forward Gala so strange, so seismic. Because Elon Musk doesn't do vulnerability. Not in public. Not with strangers. Not under bright lights and cameras. But something shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the dare. Or maybe, just maybe, after 4 decades of being told he was too odd, too cold, too analytical, Elon finally decided to be something else. Real. And when he opened his mouth to sing Rocket Man, he wasn't just covering a classic. He was telling the truth in a language he had never dared to speak aloud. He was giving the crowd a glimpse into the parts of himself that had always been too tender, too quiet, too painful to expose. The moment may have only lasted 3 minutes. But to understand the power of it, to understand why people wept, why they stood, why the air in that ballroom shifted forever, you have to know this. Elon Musk didn't become a symbol of the future because he's brilliant. He became one because he's broken. And he never stopped building machines, rockets, dreams, not to escape the world, but to survive it. It was easy to believe Elon Musk had it all figured out. He built rockets that landed backwards on barges in the ocean. He sent electric cars into space, dug tunnels beneath cities, and joked about it all on Twitter like it was just another Tuesday. To the world, he was an enigma in a black t-shirt, a billionaire who somehow ran 6 companies, had 10 kids, tweeted memes at 2 a.m., and still made time to fight with journalists online. But inside the glass box of global fame, things weren't so simple. A seemingly harmless one. Just another podcast. Joe Rogan, 3 hours into a casual, smoky interview, leaned forward and asked, "You ever feel like people don't really know you?" Elon blinked. He hesitated. Then gave his go-to answer. "I mean, yeah. I guess I don't really know me sometimes either." It was half truth, half defense. But when the podcast aired, the clip went viral. Not because of the answer, but because of the look on Elon's face when he gave it. Frozen. Hollow-eyed. Like he was drifting through space again, alone, far from Earth. The online conversation turned quickly. He's lost touch. Is Elon okay? He's like a robot now. Genius? Sure. But I bet he's never felt anything real in his life. And the worst one. He's everything, except human. That one hit hardest. Because the truth was, Elon had felt a lot. He just didn't show it the way people expected. He didn't cry on stage. He didn't give TED Talks about vulnerability. He built systems instead of stories. He fixed problems instead of fixing himself. But the problem was growing. Every time he made a public appearance, someone joked about his lack of emotion. In meetings, colleagues said he was brilliant but cold. In interviews, reporters asked if he ever just relaxed. And every now and then, when he let a smile slip or made a clumsy attempt at humor, the internet pounced. Cringe. Is he trying to be relatable now? This man has never laughed in his life. Behind closed doors, it started to wear him down. Sleep came less and less. He paced at night, watching the numbers scroll across his monitors, satellite orbits, battery metrics, neural code patterns. Data made sense. Feelings didn't. Even his kids had started calling him Space Dad, not because of the rockets, but because he was always somewhere else. He tried to fix it in the only way he knew how, with action. He created a new project at Neuralink focused on emotional response AI. The goal? Build interfaces that could understand and replicate human feeling. But deep down, even he knew. You can't code what you don't understand. One night, around 3 a.m., he was alone in the Tesla design lab. The whiteboards were covered in half-erased equations and scrapped design sketches. Music played softly from a nearby speaker, an old Bowie track. Heroes. He stared at it. That word, heroes. He used to think he was one. Or becoming one. But now. He wasn't sure. He pulled up an old file on his computer. A video he hadn't watched in years. His mom, May, singing him to sleep. Fuzzy, grainy VHS footage. She was humming in Afrikaans. Elon, barely 4, curled up in her arms. The boy in that video wasn't a genius yet. He was just loved. He closed the laptop. Pushed back from the desk. And for the first time in years, whispered aloud to no one. Maybe I built all this, just to feel something. The words stunned even him. Not because they were poetic. But because they were honest. A few days later, he flew to Austin for the Tech Forward Gala. Not because he wanted to. But because he had to. He'd been invited every year. Always declined. This time, his friend Larry Page cornered him at a private dinner and said, "Come on, Elon. You're always the smartest guy in the room. Why not be the most surprising too?" Elon had chuckled. Surprising how? Larry raised a brow. Sing something. You know you've got a good voice. Elon nearly choked on his water. I'm not a performer. No, Larry said. But maybe that's exactly why you should do it. The dare was planted. The idea, ridiculous as it seemed, took root. Elon didn't commit to anything. But he started humming Rocket Man under his breath more than usual. Even told his assistant to send over the chords, just in case. He didn't tell anyone else. Not even his kids. But somewhere, deep down, the glass box he'd been trapped in his whole life had begun to crack. Just a little. Because the greatest minds in the world can go a lifetime without being understood. But what happens when they realize, they want to be? The lights of the Crescent Pavilion flickered like distant stars, casting a soft glow over the crowd. The murmurs of excitement, anticipation, and speculation filled the air, but none of it was about technology. None of it was about rockets or electric cars. For once, it was just about a single man, standing at the edge of an unimaginable risk. Elon Musk was about to do something he'd never imagined he would. And truth be told, he wasn't entirely sure why. It had started as a joke. Kyle, the MC, had always been known for his sharp humor, his quick wit, and his love for embarrassing people, especially billionaires who spent their days designing rockets and cars. The crowd loved it. But this time, Kyle had pushed it a bit too far, daring Elon to sing. Elon had agreed, but only half-heartedly. It was meant to be a joke. A moment of absurdity. Something he could laugh off later. What he didn't realize was how it would feel. To be seen. To be vulnerable. To be human. Backstage, the countdown was underway. The tech moguls and venture capitalists had all returned to their phones, chatting amongst themselves, oblivious to the nerves that had begun to set in. Elon stood in the wings, hands tucked into his pockets, looking down at his shoes. His mind was racing, as always. There were a million things to think about, businesses to run, rockets to launch, deadlines to meet. But for the first time in a long time, his mind wasn't focused on those things. It wasn't consumed by the numbers, the data, or the impossible problems of the future. It was focused on one thing only. What if I fail? What if he embarrassed himself? What if his voice cracked? What if the world saw him not as a genius innovator, but as a man who couldn't even hold a tune? Then, a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. "You got this, man." It was Larry Page, standing in the doorway. The Google co-founder gave him a reassuring smile. There was no doubt in Larry's eyes, only encouragement. "It's just a song, Elon. It's just you." Elon nodded, but the knot in his stomach remained. He wasn't afraid of failure, not in the business world, not in engineering, not in space. But this was different. This was about something far more fragile than numbers. This was about him, stripped of the facade of genius, exposed for who he really was. A man. A broken one, at that. The spotlight hit him as soon as he stepped onto the stage. The crowd erupted into applause, but there was an edge to it. It wasn't the usual polite applause of a high-profile gala. This was nervous energy. Curiosity. People wanted to see him fail. They wanted to see the billionaire genius bring himself down to their level. They wanted to see vulnerability, to confirm that no one, not even someone as seemingly infallible as Elon Musk, was untouchable. And that's when the first crack appeared. For a split second, Elon hesitated. He caught sight of the crowd, some faces eager, some skeptical, others just waiting for something to go wrong. The weight of their gaze hit him like a physical force. But then, he remembered. It's just a song. He adjusted the mic. The band kicked in, playing the familiar intro to Rocket Man. He took a breath. And when the first words slipped from his lips, something unexpected happened. He didn't feel the weight of the room. For that brief moment, it was just him. Just the music. Just the raw, messy emotion that had been bottled up for so long. His voice cracked slightly, but it didn't matter. The lyrics flowed, his body swaying gently to the melody, and for the first time in years, he was not a tech mogul, a billionaire, or a visionary. He was just a man. A man singing. And for once, it felt freeing. The crowd watched, transfixed. They were expecting a joke, a funny failure to tweet about. But instead, they witnessed something they had never anticipated. The man who had always been more machine than man, who had built his empire on innovation and precision, was standing there, unpolished, imperfect, and human. When the final notes of Rocket Man drifted into silence, the room held its breath. There was a moment, just a second, where time seemed to stop. Elon stood still, his head slightly bowed, waiting for the inevitable criticism. But then, something strange happened. The applause came, slow at first. Then louder. Then it became a thunderous standing ovation, the sound of hundreds of people on their feet. They weren't clapping out of politeness, or because they had to. They were applauding the raw honesty of the moment. They were applauding the vulnerability of a man who had just let them see a side of him no one ever had. It wasn't about the performance. It was about the risk. Elon stood there, stunned, caught in the wave of applause. He hadn't expected this. He'd expected jokes. Maybe mockery. But this? This was something else entirely. He hadn't been performing. He hadn't been playing a role. He hadn't been the genius who could do no wrong. He had just been Elon. And that was enough. As the applause began to die down, Elon turned to Kyle, the MC, who was still staring at him with wide eyes. There was a grin on his face, but it wasn't the smug, comedic grin Elon had expected. It was something softer. Something more genuine. "Well, that was unexpected," Kyle said, still processing the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we just witnessed history." Elon nodded, but didn't say anything. His heart was still racing, not from the song, but from the overwhelming realization of what he had just done. For the first time, he had stepped out from behind the glass box that everyone had placed him in. For the first time, he had shown himself not as a billionaire, a visionary, or a genius, but as a man, fragile and real. And in that moment, the crowd had embraced him. They hadn't seen him as a symbol, or a tech mogul, or a meme machine. They had seen him. The next morning, the world had woken up to a very different Elon Musk. The headline on every major news outlet read the same. Elon Musk's impromptu performance at Tech Forward Gala stuns audience. At first, Elon had thought it would be a fleeting moment, an oddity. He had performed a song, sure, but it wasn't that big of a deal, was it? After all, he had done far more shocking things in the past, launching a Tesla into space, inventing the Hyperloop, sending astronauts to the International Space Station. A song seemed insignificant in comparison. But then he checked Twitter. And his stomach sank. The flood of tweets had already begun. Thousands, no, millions, of people had watched the video clip of him singing Rocket Man, and their reactions were immediate. "Elon Musk just sang Rocket Man and I don't know if I'm more impressed or uncomfortable. This is the most bizarre thing I've ever seen, but also strangely heartwarming. Is this some kind of midlife crisis or the greatest form of self-expression we've ever seen? Can someone explain why I'm tearing up watching Rocket Man by Elon Musk? Elon Musk just showed us he's more human than we ever gave him credit for." The reactions were mixed. Some were confused. Some were empathetic. Others were just straight up mocking. But there was one thing that stood out above all the noise. Even the press couldn't ignore the emotional reaction that had followed his performance. But as with all viral moments, the public didn't take long to latch onto their own interpretations. Some praised him for his courage, his willingness to step outside his usual robotic persona. Others were less kind. What a desperate attempt for attention. Is Elon trying to play the relatable card now? It's all part of the brand, isn't it? Just another billionaire who doesn't know what it's like to struggle. In the midst of it all, Elon found himself strangely conflicted. He'd stepped outside his comfort zone, into a territory he had long avoided, yet now he was faced with a paradox. He had risked everything to show the world who he really was. And yet, all they seemed to care about was whether or not his vulnerability was authentic enough for their approval. Back at his Tesla office, Elon sat at his desk, scrolling through the tweets. The comments were overwhelming. He couldn't tell if they made him feel validated or more isolated. Maybe I shouldn't have done it, he thought, running a hand through his hair. But then, something unexpected happened. Amid the barrage of comments, there was one tweet that stood out, a message from an anonymous user. It wasn't a criticism. It wasn't a joke. "I've never seen you like this, Elon. I always thought you were just a robot with a dream, but now I see you're just like the rest of us. Vulnerable. Scared. Human. Thank you for showing us that." It was a simple message. Nothing elaborate. But for some reason, it hit him harder than any of the other reactions. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. It was rare for Elon to do something so simple. But the weight of everything, the scrutiny, the conflicting feedback, the attention, had begun to gnaw at him. He needed to clear his head. As he walked through the quiet streets of Palo Alto, he reflected on the event. He thought about the people who had applauded him, the ones who had genuinely seen something deeper in that moment. Maybe it wasn't about his performance at all. Maybe, just maybe, it was the fact that he had dared to show the world his fear, his flaws, and his uncertainty. That night, a call came in. It was Grimes, the mother of his children. "Elon," she began, her voice both soothing and matter-of-fact. "I saw the video." Elon hesitated. He wasn't sure what to expect from her. She wasn't one for conventional praise, but she also wasn't afraid to tell him the truth when he needed to hear it. "I think you did something good," she said after a moment. "You let them see you. You were honest. That's more than most people will ever do." Elon swallowed. Her words felt like a bomb. He hadn't expected validation from her, but in that moment, he realized that maybe he didn't need it. Maybe the validation was supposed to come from within. "Thanks," he said softly, his voice almost lost in the quiet hum of the evening. Grimes paused. "Just, don't let it change you, okay?" Elon smiled slightly. "I don't know if I can change back now." By the end of the week, the Rocket Man performance had become a cultural phenomenon. It wasn't just about the tech mogul singing a song. It was about the walls he had broken down, both his own and the ones others had built around him. Elon was still the man who ran SpaceX, the man who revolutionized transportation, the man who challenged the status quo with every step he took. But now, for the first time in a long time, the world was seeing him differently. And, strangely enough, so was he. In the days that followed, Elon began to make changes. Not to his companies, not to his innovations, but to himself. He took a step back from the relentless grind. He spent more time with his kids. He reached out to old friends. He stopped hiding behind the mask of the perfect genius. One evening, as he sat with a guitar in his hands, something he hadn't touched in years, he began to strum a simple melody. It wasn't anything groundbreaking. It was just him. A man, alone with his thoughts, playing a tune for no one in particular. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like enough. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The morning sunlight poured through the windows of Elon's office, casting long shadows across the sleek, minimalist design of the room. The usual clutter of papers and to-do lists was absent. Today, the desk was almost empty, save for a few notes and a single cup of coffee, barely touched. For the first time in a long time, Elon felt the weight of his responsibilities settle differently. It wasn't gone, far from it. But the weight now had a different shape. It felt more manageable, less suffocating. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of scrutiny, praise, and confusion. He had faced the world's expectations head-on, revealing a part of himself most people didn't think existed. But now, as he sat in the calm of his office, he couldn't help but reflect on how that vulnerability had transformed him. Elon leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He'd always been a man of vision, of impossible dreams that pushed the boundaries of what people thought was possible. But those dreams had always been wrapped in steel and data. He had never stopped to consider how much of those dreams were built on the expectations of others. How many of those dreams were designed to project an image of invincibility? It wasn't that he wanted to abandon his ambitions. No, his desire to send people to Mars, to fight climate change, and to revolutionize humanity's future was still as strong as ever. But now, there was a new layer to his vision. A deeper, more personal connection to the people who would help make those dreams a reality. He thought about the standing ovation, the applause that had, in some strange way, redefined the meaning of success for him. It wasn't about launching a rocket into space or building a new car model. It was about authenticity. About being true to who you were, flaws and all. The phone buzzed on his desk, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Gwynne Shotwell, the president and COO of SpaceX, who had always been a grounding force in his chaotic world. "Elon, we need to talk. There's a shift happening. Let's discuss this new direction when you're ready." He knew exactly what she meant. Gwyn was one of the few people who had been with him through it all. The successes, the failures, and the countless nights spent troubleshooting rockets or redesigning the Tesla. She wasn't just an executive. She was someone who understood him. Understood the pressure, the drive, and most importantly, the burden of trying to be more than just a man. But lately, something had shifted between them. And it wasn't just because of the viral performance. It was because of something much deeper. Gwyn had noticed the change in him before anyone else did. She'd seen it in his eyes during their last meeting, when they were talking about SpaceX's latest mission to Mars. For the first time, Elon had spoken about it in a way that was personal. Not just a way to make history, but as something that was deeply connected to the future of humanity. Elon stood up and walked over to the window. He could see the Tesla factory in the distance, the same factory that had once symbolized his relentless pursuit of perfection. It had always been a place of innovation, where every mistake was a failure and every success was just a stepping stone to the next goal. But now, there was something else he saw, a future not just for himself, but for everyone. As the sun rose higher in the sky, casting its light on the buildings below, Elon realized something that had eluded him for so long. He had spent so much of his life pushing forward, building the future, that he had forgotten to take a moment to appreciate the present. He had been so focused on the next big thing, on what he needed to accomplish, that he had lost sight of why he started in the first place. It wasn't about the fame, the fortune, or the recognition. It was about connection. It was about making a difference. Not just through technology, but through understanding, compassion, and the willingness to be vulnerable. Later that day, Elon sat down with Gwyn in the conference room at SpaceX. The usual tension between them was gone, replaced by something more honest. "You've changed, Elon," Gwyn said, her voice measured but kind. "And I think it's time we acknowledge that. You've always been a visionary, but now, you're a leader who understands people. You're not just building the future, you're inviting others to help build it with you." Elon looked at her, his thoughts swirling. "I'm still figuring it out, Gwyn. But I think I finally see what I need to do. It's not just about being the smartest person in the room anymore. It's about being real." Gwyn nodded, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "That's what people need. They need to know that the person leading them is human. They need to know you're someone who can fail, and still get back up. They need to see you as someone who listens, who cares." The next few months were a whirlwind. SpaceX launched its most successful mission yet, and Tesla made huge strides in sustainable energy and electric vehicles. But this time, something was different. Elon wasn't just a figurehead of these companies, he was a true leader. He led with empathy, with vulnerability, and with a new sense of purpose. He began to prioritize time with his employees, engaging in conversations that went beyond the usual business jargon. He spent more time with his children, taking them to launch sites and teaching them about the importance of following one's passions. And he made a habit of checking in with his team, whether it was over a casual lunch or a late-night brainstorming session. It wasn't about having all the answers, it was about collaboration, about recognizing that no one, not even him, had all the answers. In the years that followed, Elon's transformation became one of the most talked about stories in business. The man who had once been seen as the epitome of robotic efficiency had become the face of a new kind of leadership, one built on transparency, humility, and the courage to show the world who you really were. And when the time came for the next major SpaceX mission, Elon Musk didn't just take the stage as a CEO. He took it as a man who had learned to embrace his flaws, to accept that he wasn't perfect, and to realize that his true strength lay in his ability to connect with others. As the rocket blasted off into the sky, Elon stood on the balcony, watching it rise. His heart swelled, not with pride, but with peace. For the first time, he knew that the journey ahead wasn't just about technology. It was about humanity. And for the first time, he was leading it, not from the front, but alongside everyone who believed in the future. The years had passed quickly. Looking back, Elon Musk could hardly believe how far he had come. The young entrepreneur who once dominated boardrooms with numbers and ambitious timelines had evolved into something more. Now, as he stood on the balcony of his sleek, modern home overlooking the Tesla factory, it wasn't just the sprawling fields of electric cars or the rocket launch pads of SpaceX that captured his attention. It was the quiet realization that his legacy was no longer just defined by the companies he had built or the innovations he had pioneered. His legacy, he now understood, was rooted in something deeper, something that transcended technology. It was the shift in leadership. Elon thought about the countless conversations he had had in the past few years, the moments spent with employees, the late-night talks with engineers, the casual sit-downs with his executive team. It wasn't about the code or the algorithms anymore, it was about people. Years ago, his approach to leadership was about being the smartest person in the room. He'd always prided himself on pushing limits, taking risks, and not allowing failure to define him. But now, he saw things in a new light. The strength of his leadership wasn't in his ability to solve every problem alone. It was in his ability to inspire others, to bring them into the fold, to make them believe in something bigger than themselves. His thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. It was Gwynne Shotwell, still by his side after all these years, always the voice of reason. "Elon," she greeted, stepping into the room. "I think we've hit another milestone." Elon raised an eyebrow, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Another one? You're telling me we haven't reached the finish line yet?" Gwynne chuckled softly. "In some ways, we'll never reach the finish line. But this one feels significant. People are finally starting to recognize what we've been working toward all these years." She handed him a tablet, showing him the latest news cycle. It was an article about his leadership style, how it was influencing not just Silicon Valley but the corporate world at large. Elon Musk's vulnerability and leadership, a new model for the future. The article detailed how companies around the world were beginning to adopt his new approach to leadership, one that valued emotional intelligence, openness, and collaboration over traditional power dynamics. It discussed how the culture at SpaceX and Tesla had shifted, emphasizing inclusivity, respect for failure, and the idea that leadership wasn't just about control, but about enabling others to lead alongside you. Elon leaned back, his fingers lightly tapping on the tablet as he took it all in. He wasn't sure what he had expected. When the world had first reacted to his performance of Rocket Man, he had been unsure of the long-term impact it would have. What he hadn't anticipated was that it would spark a movement, a new way of thinking about leadership, one where vulnerability was seen as strength, not weakness. A movement where transparency and collaboration took precedence over the cold, calculated ambition that often characterized the tech world. But as the years passed, Elon realized that these small changes were creating ripples across the corporate world. Leaders in every industry, from tech to entertainment to healthcare, began to embrace the idea of leadership rooted in human connection. Elon Musk was no longer just the eccentric billionaire. He had become the symbol of a new era of leadership. This shift was clear when he looked at his teams. The people who had worked alongside him for years, the engineers at SpaceX, the innovators at Tesla, these were people who had been empowered to take ownership of their work, to make mistakes, and to grow. They weren't just following orders anymore, they were part of a greater mission. A voice echoed from the hallway, calling his name. "Dad?" Elon turned to see his son, XAEA-12, standing in the doorway, wide-eyed and curious. Elon smiled, his heart warming at the sight. "Hey, buddy. What's up?" XAEA-12 walked over and placed a drawing on the desk, a crude picture of a rocket ship with a happy face and stars in the background. "I made this for you," he said, beaming. Elon chuckled softly, the stress of the day lifting as he looked at the drawing. It was simple, but it held so much meaning. To his son, rockets weren't just machines, they were vessels of hope, of dreams, of exploration. Elon took the drawing and placed it on his desk, where it would join countless other pieces of artwork from his children. "I love it, buddy. Thank you." As XAEA-12 turned and ran off to play, Elon felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This was what it was all about, leaving something behind that wasn't just about technology, but about the people who carried those dreams forward. That evening, after the sun had set and the stars began to dot the sky, Elon stood outside, gazing up at the stars. Mars was out there, a faint red speck in the distance. He had spent so many years working towards sending humans to that distant planet, but now, he saw the bigger picture. It wasn't about Mars. It wasn't about any one mission or accomplishment. It was about creating a legacy that would last far beyond his time. A legacy of innovation, yes, but more importantly, a legacy of leadership that understood the true power of connection, of empathy, of embracing vulnerability. As he stood there, the weight of the years and the endless work ahead of him seemed less daunting. In the past, his obsession with success had felt like an anchor around his neck. But now, he felt lighter, like the future was something he could build with others, not something he had to carry alone. Elon smiled, a sense of peace settling over him. He had created a future that wasn't defined by the machines or rockets he built, but by the people who had helped him build them. And as the stars shimmered in the night sky, he knew that his true legacy wasn't just about sending rockets to space or revolutionizing technology. It was about showing the world that leadership, at its core, was about human connection. The days blurred together as Elon Musk's life continued to spiral in a whirlwind of success, challenges, and personal reflection. But now, something had changed. As SpaceX prepared for its most ambitious mission yet, a manned mission to Mars, Elon found himself confronting a new kind of pressure. This wasn't about the technology anymore, it was about what comes next. For years, he had been the one pulling the strings, the visionary with the plan, the person others looked to for answers. But as the launch date drew closer, Elon began to ask himself questions that went beyond rockets, cars, or even space exploration. What was his role going to be in the future? Elon sat alone in his office, staring at the plans for the Mars mission spread out before him. The launch was only a few months away, and SpaceX was closer than ever to making interplanetary travel a reality. Yet, despite all the excitement, he felt an undeniable weight on his shoulders. There was something looming in the background, an unspoken truth that had been creeping up on him for months. The world was watching him. The world had always watched him. But now, there was a sense of finality to it all. Was he truly ready for the next phase of his life? The mission to Mars was a monumental achievement, but after that? What then? He picked up his phone and dialed Gwynne Shotwell. The ringtone echoed through the room, the seconds ticking away until her voice filled the silence. Elon, what's up? Gwynne answered, her tone familiar and steady. I've been thinking a lot lately, Elon said, his voice laced with a sense of uncertainty that he hadn't expected to feel. About the mission, about everything. I don't know if I'm ready to let go. Gwynne paused for a moment, then spoke with calm reassurance. Elon, you've been preparing for this for years. We all have. It's not just about the mission. It's about what comes after. You've built something incredible, and you don't have to be the one to carry it all alone anymore. Elon took a deep breath, absorbing her words. She was right, of course. SpaceX had grown beyond his singular vision. Tesla had become a force of innovation in its own right. Both companies were thriving, driven by the teams he had helped build, the culture he had fostered, and the values he had instilled. But still, the thought of stepping back, of loosening his grip on the reins, was terrifying. As the conversation with Gwynne continued, Elon began to realize something important. The pressure he was feeling wasn't just from his company or the world. It was from himself. For years, he had been obsessed with achieving the impossible, of creating a future that seemed out of reach for so many. But now, the question was different. It wasn't just about the future of space exploration or technology. It was about his own future. His legacy wasn't only about launching rockets. It was about creating a sustainable future for humanity. And that future didn't need to revolve around just one person. It needed to be carried forward by everyone who believed in it. Over the following weeks, Elon worked tirelessly on the Mars mission with his team, fine-tuning every detail, ensuring that the mission would be nothing short of spectacular. Yet, as the countdown to the launch approached, he began to allow himself moments of reflection, questioning what it meant to truly step back. He realized that his role wasn't about being the face of every project or being involved in every little detail. It was about setting a vision, building a team, and trusting them to take the mission even further. It was about creating a culture of ownership and empowerment, not just following his lead. The night before the Mars mission launch, Elon stood on the balcony of his home once again, gazing out at the night sky. The stars twinkled brightly above, each one a reminder of what humanity had yet to accomplish. For years, he had looked at the stars as something to conquer, something to reach. But tonight, he looked at them differently. The stars weren't just distant objects in the sky, they were symbols of possibility, of dreams that had yet to be realized. And those dreams would be carried on by countless people, far beyond the efforts of any one individual. As he stood there, his thoughts turned to his children, to the people he loved, and to the countless employees at SpaceX, Tesla, and beyond, who had worked tirelessly to help turn his vision into a reality. His legacy wasn't just a collection of rockets or electric cars. It was the inspiration he had ignited in people to dream big, to push boundaries, and to believe in the impossible. He thought about the people who looked up to him, who saw him as a beacon of what was possible. But now, as the mission neared its launch, he realized that his true contribution was not just the technology he had created. It was the confidence he had instilled in others, the way he had shown that it was okay to fail, to try again, and to keep pushing forward despite all odds. The next morning, Elon stood on the platform at Cape Canaveral, watching as the SpaceX team made their final preparations for the mission. The rocket, sleek and silver, stood tall against the blue sky, a testament to all the work that had gone into it. The mission to Mars was about to become a reality, but more importantly, it was the beginning of something bigger. "This is it," Gwynn said, walking up beside him. "We've done it. They've done it." Elon looked at the team gathered around, their eyes filled with anticipation, excitement, and hope. It was no longer just his dream. It was theirs. They were the ones who would continue to carry it forward, long after the dust settled. The countdown began. T-10 minutes. Elon's heart raced, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was peace. Peace knowing that he had done what he set out to do, not just with rockets and cars, but with the people who had made it all possible. As the rocket launched, a thunderous roar filled the air, the flames lighting up the sky. Elon stood in awe, watching as the spacecraft soared into the atmosphere. He had done it. He had helped make history. But more than that, he had helped create a future. A future where humanity's potential was limitless. And as the rocket disappeared into the sky, Elon realized that his job was far from over. This was just the beginning. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to let go, not of his mission, but of the idea that he had to be at the center of everything. The future wasn't something he had to control. It was something he had to trust others to carry forward. And with that, Elon Musk smiled, his heart full of hope. The days after the successful Mars mission launch felt like a blur. The media was abuzz with excitement, the world's eyes fixed on the stars. SpaceX had done the impossible, humanity was on its way to becoming a multiplanetary species. But for Elon Musk, as much as he appreciated the monumental achievement, there was something deeper gnawing at him. The launch was just the beginning, and yet, there was a lingering question that kept him up at night. Elon found himself walking the familiar halls of SpaceX, the hum of busy engineers and technicians working in the background. But today, the office felt different. It wasn't just the usual excitement surrounding a new breakthrough or the anticipation of the next launch. It was more profound. It was as if the very act of venturing into space had opened up something inside him, a space for reflection, for understanding the true impact of what he had set in motion. He stepped into his office and gazed out of the window at the sprawling launch complex below. The rockets were soaring into the unknown, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the true question wasn't about space, it was about what it meant for humanity. Over the next few weeks, Elon became increasingly introspective. He took long walks by the beach, staring out at the horizon, where the ocean met the sky. It was a line, a barrier. He'd spent so many years focused on pushing past those boundaries, determined to reach the unreachable. But now, in the quiet of his solitude, he couldn't help but ask himself. He had always been a visionary. A person who saw a future that others didn't, who dreamed big and thought beyond what most people thought was possible. But in the aftermath of the Mars launch, he found himself wondering about something more fundamental, the human experience. He had brought technology to the world in ways few could have imagined. Space travel, electric vehicles, even the idea of sustainable energy were once seen as impossible, but now they were on the verge of becoming everyday realities. But space, this uncharted territory, wasn't just about innovation. It was about the very nature of human survival. In a few short years, SpaceX had managed to make humanity's survival beyond Earth seem possible. But that raised an even bigger question for Elon: was that enough? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Elon sat down with Gwynne Shotwell in his office. They had been through so much together, from the early days of SpaceX to the massive success of the Mars mission. "Gwynne, I've been thinking a lot lately," Elon began, staring down at his desk. "What's next for humanity? It's one thing to get to Mars, but we've only scratched the surface." Gwynne sat across from him, her eyes thoughtful. "We've barely begun, Elon. But the real question isn't about technology or the physical act of traveling to Mars. It's about how we build a future out there. What do we want humanity to be once we get there? Will we repeat the mistakes we've made here on Earth, or can we create something new?" Elon leaned back in his chair, absorbing her words. The weight of the conversation hung in the air, the flickering light from the desk lamp casting shadows across the room. For Elon, it was no longer about the journey itself, it was about the destination. It was about what humanity would choose to become when given the opportunity to start anew. Earth, with all its beauty and flaws, was limited. There were wars, poverty, inequality, issues that had persisted for centuries. But on Mars, there was the potential to build something from the ground up, to create a society that didn't repeat the mistakes of its past. But that vision was fraught with challenges. Who would be chosen to go? How would society structure itself? Would it be a fresh start, or simply a repetition of human history? The questions continued to haunt him. He had spent so much of his life focused on the practicalities of space travel, building the rockets, testing the technology, ensuring the survival of the first crewed mission to Mars. But now, for the first time, he was thinking about the philosophical questions. What would it mean for humanity to live on another planet? Could we really escape the flaws of Earth, or would they follow us to the stars? Elon wasn't the only one asking these questions. The world was beginning to ponder these same existential concerns. As the media buzzed with excitement over the Mars mission, more and more thinkers, philosophers, and even politicians began to weigh in on what humanity's future in space would look like. Would the expansion into space be a second chance for humanity to start fresh? Or would it merely be an extension of the same old conflicts and problems? In a way, the answers to these questions would define the next era of human civilization. It was no longer just about building a sustainable, thriving society on Mars, it was about rethinking what humanity could be when given the opportunity to start anew. Elon had always believed that innovation was the answer to everything. He had built companies, launched rockets, and transformed industries because he believed that technology was the key to solving humanity's most pressing problems. But now, with the prospect of settling on Mars in the not-too-distant future, he realized that technology alone wasn't enough. Humanity would need to evolve, to rethink its values, its systems, and its way of life. The next generation, the ones who would travel to Mars, would be tasked with building that new society. It wasn't enough to be a brilliant engineer, a visionary entrepreneur, or a successful CEO. They would need to be something more. They would need to be ethical leaders, capable of forging a future based on the lessons learned from the past. And perhaps, most importantly, they would need to carry with them the values that Elon had fought for throughout his entire career, the values of innovation, sustainability, and the belief that the future belonged to those who dared to dream. Elon realized that his role wasn't over, it had only just begun. His vision for humanity's future wasn't just about reaching the stars. It was about ensuring that those who would follow him would have the tools, the understanding, and the wisdom to build a better future. The future wasn't just about technology, it was about the human spirit, the drive to build, to dream, and to create a world that was better than the one they left behind. As he stood at the helm of SpaceX, staring up at the stars once again, Elon understood something important. The journey into space wasn't just about exploring new frontiers. It was about exploring ourselves, about understanding what it meant to be human, and how we could evolve as a species to become better, stronger, and more compassionate. Space was no longer just the final frontier. It was a mirror, reflecting the very essence of humanity. As Elon Musk continued to lead SpaceX and Tesla into a future filled with extraordinary possibilities, he found himself at a crossroads. He had always believed in the power of technology to transform the world, but now, as the prospect of interplanetary colonization was becoming a reality, he began to feel the weight of a different responsibility. His role had evolved beyond just making rockets fly or electric cars a reality. It was about preparing the next generation to handle the future he had helped shape. For years, Elon had been a disruptor, a visionary, pushing forward with his ideas, regardless of how impossible they seemed. But now, his focus shifted. It wasn't just about getting people to Mars or advancing artificial intelligence, it was about ensuring that those who would carry the torch into the next phase of humanity's existence were ready to lead. The more Elon thought about it, the more he realized that education would be at the heart of this new frontier. Space exploration, electric vehicles, renewable energy, these weren't just technologies. They were the tools for the future, but it would be the next generation that would use them to create something more profound. He began to reach out to educators, scientists, and thought leaders from around the world, engaging in conversations about the kind of education that would prepare young minds for a world that was rapidly changing. The future of humanity wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving, about creating a world that was better, more sustainable, and more connected than ever before. Elon knew that the next wave of leaders, engineers, innovators, politicians, and thinkers, would need more than just technical knowledge. They needed to understand the broader philosophical questions about what it meant to be human, and how to build a society that didn't repeat the mistakes of the past. He envisioned a future where humanity wasn't bound by the limitations of Earth but had expanded into the cosmos, making use of everything that space had to offer while protecting and preserving the values that made us who we are. But that vision was only possible if education could catch up to the pace of change. Elon began to invest in projects aimed at revolutionizing the way we learn. It wasn't just about teaching kids to memorize facts, it was about giving them the tools to think critically, to solve problems, and to adapt to a world that was increasingly interconnected and rapidly evolving. One day, as he sat in a meeting with his team, a thought struck him, one that had been percolating in the back of his mind for a while. Space travel, electric cars, and AI could only take humanity so far. What would happen when we reached the stars? Would we know how to build a new society, a new world, or would we simply repeat the same mistakes we had made on Earth? He asked his team to pause their work for a moment, to look around the room and reflect. Imagine, he said, that we are no longer just building technologies. We are building the future of humanity. We need to be thinking about not just what we create, but how we create it. Gwynne Shotwell, his longtime colleague, nodded. She'd heard Elon's grand ideas many times before, but this one felt different. It's about the culture we build, she said. We need to make sure that the next generation knows how to build a future that's not just about tech, but about values. The people who'll lead humanity into space won't just need technical skills. They'll need emotional intelligence, ethical reasoning, and the ability to bring diverse perspectives together. Elon agreed. The future was more than technology. It was about fostering unity, collaboration, and sustainability, principles that transcended individual achievements and moved humanity towards something greater. Elon's focus on education deepened, and he soon became a vocal advocate for reforming educational systems worldwide. He publicly expressed his belief that the traditional education system, which had been in place for centuries, was ill-equipped to prepare future leaders for the challenges that lay ahead. The world was changing too rapidly for old models of schooling to suffice. It wasn't enough to simply teach children to sit in rows and memorize textbooks. Creativity, problem-solving, and collaboration were the skills that would define the leaders of tomorrow. Elon began to collaborate with thought leaders from the world of education, psychology, and philosophy to develop a new kind of curriculum, one that was forward-thinking, dynamic, and adaptable. He envisioned schools where students weren't just learning facts, they were solving real-world problems, working together across disciplines, and exploring their own passions in a hands-on, experiential way. They would be challenged not just to think critically, but to act on their ideas and make a real-world impact. As Elon's focus shifted from technology to the broader picture of humanity's future, he began to envision a new world, a world where humans were not bound by national borders, but were united by the pursuit of knowledge, sustainability, and the exploration of the stars. A world where individuals work together, not for personal gain, but for the collective good. In this new world, the idea of leadership would be different. It wouldn't be about one person holding all the power, but about a network of individuals who were empowered to lead in their own right. Space, with all its possibilities, was not just about building a new home for humanity, it was about rethinking what it meant to be human. And that, Elon realized, was what would truly define his legacy. A few months after the launch to Mars, Elon gave a keynote speech at the International Space Exploration Conference in Geneva. The crowd was filled with scientists, astronauts, entrepreneurs, and policymakers, all eager to hear what the next big step in space exploration would be. But this time, Elon's message was different. He spoke not about the next rocket, the next breakthrough, or the next Mars mission. Instead, he talked about humanity's potential, and how the journey to the stars was not just about the technology we created, but about the society we wanted to build. He shared his thoughts on education, on fostering a culture of innovation and sustainability, and on the responsibility of the next generation to carry the torch into space. And, most importantly, he spoke about the need for humanity to evolve, not just technologically, but ethically and spiritually, so that when we reached the stars, we could build something truly magnificent. The applause that followed Elon's speech was deafening, and as he stepped off the stage, he felt a sense of peace. This was his new mission. Not just to make life multiplanetary, but to ensure that humanity's future, wherever it might be, would be one of hope, unity, and progress. The days following his speech at the International Space Exploration Conference were some of the most introspective Elon had experienced in years. The applause, the recognition, the endless media interviews, they all seemed distant to him now. It wasn't the validation he sought anymore, it was the deeper meaning behind everything he had built, everything he had sacrificed, and everything he hoped to leave behind. In the quiet moments, as he sat alone in his office or walked through the halls of SpaceX, he found himself thinking about legacy, what it truly meant. Elon had always been driven by a desire to push boundaries, to do what others thought was impossible. From the moment he founded SpaceX, he had seen a future in which humanity was no longer confined to a single planet. He had seen the potential to change the course of history. But now, as the years passed, he realized that his legacy wasn't just about getting to Mars, or launching the first electric cars. It wasn't even about the companies he had built or the technologies he had pioneered. His legacy would be measured by something much more profound, the impact his work had on the world, the change it inspired in others, and the future he had helped create for generations to come. Elon leaned back in his chair, staring out at the stars visible through the massive window of his office. Space, once a distant dream, was now within humanity's reach. But it wasn't just the technology that had brought him here, it was the vision, the belief that a better future was possible if we dared to dream and worked relentlessly to make it a reality. He thought about the young engineers, scientists, and thinkers who now looked to him as a role model. These were the individuals who would carry his vision forward, who would continue the work of not just exploring space but making Earth a better place in the process. Elon's role was no longer that of the relentless innovator, the risk-taker who fought against all odds to achieve the impossible. His role had shifted. It was now about guiding others, helping them see the possibilities that lay before them, and empowering them to push the limits of what was achievable. One evening, after a long day of meetings and calls, Elon found himself at a quiet dinner with his children, X, his son, and his other two kids, Griffin and Xavier. The conversation drifted from school to life, from hobbies to dreams. "Dad," X asked, looking up from his dinner with curiosity, "why do you keep doing all this stuff with rockets and cars? Why not just relax and enjoy life?" Elon smiled, a warm, genuine smile that seemed to catch him off guard. It wasn't often that he allowed himself to think about his personal life, but in this moment, he realized that this question, so simple yet profound, held the key to everything he had been striving for. "You see, X," Elon began, leaning back in his chair, "I believe that our lives are about more than just comfort or relaxation. We're here to make a difference. To leave the world better than we found it. If we don't try to solve the big problems, things like climate change, space exploration, or ensuring humanity's future, then we're just standing still. And that's not what I want for you or for anyone else." X nodded, his young mind absorbing the words with the clarity that only children seem to possess. But for Elon, it was a pivotal moment, a reminder of the legacy he hoped to leave behind, not just for his own children, but for all children of the future. A world where they could thrive, learn, and dream just as he had. Elon had often been described as a visionary, a disruptor, someone who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. But there was something else he wanted to be remembered for, the belief in the power of human potential. His whole career had been about unlocking that potential, whether it was through electric vehicles, reusable rockets, or solar energy. And as he watched the next generation of thinkers and innovators begin to take shape, he realized that the real gift wasn't in the companies he had built or the rockets he had sent to space. The real gift was in inspiring others to believe that they, too, could make a difference. That they, too, could achieve the impossible. As he reflected on his journey, Elon knew that the path he had taken hadn't always been easy. There had been failures, setbacks, and countless moments of doubt. There were times when he had felt as though the weight of the world was on his shoulders. But every challenge had taught him something invaluable. Every setback had brought him closer to the truth of what he was trying to accomplish. He thought back to the early days of SpaceX, when people laughed at his ideas, when the company was on the verge of bankruptcy, and when he had to borrow money from friends just to keep the lights on. Those were the moments that defined him, not because of the hardship, but because he didn't give up. He kept pushing forward, driven by the belief that if he could just overcome the odds, he could change the world. And change the world, he did. The sun was setting as Elon stood outside, looking up at the sky. The faint light from the stars seemed to beckon him, reminding him of how far humanity had come, and how far we still had to go. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. There were still rockets to launch, missions to complete, and challenges to overcome. But more importantly, there were still lives to impact, minds to inspire, and a future to build. As the evening sky deepened into a blanket of stars, Elon Musk realized something profound. His true legacy wasn't the tech he built, but the lives he touched and the vision he inspired in others. The future was brighter than ever, and it was in the hands of the next generation, the generation that had the power to carry his dreams forward and make them their own. And with that, Elon knew that his work would continue, not just through his companies, but through the ripple effect he had set in motion. A ripple that would carry humanity to the stars and beyond. The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting a golden light over the bustling SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne. Elon Musk stood by the window of his office, staring out at the complex below, where engineers, scientists, and dreamers worked tirelessly to bring the future to life. In the early morning quiet, he had time to reflect on the road that had led him here, the highs, the lows, and the infinite unknowns that still lay ahead. For decades, Elon had been relentlessly chasing progress. From a young, ambitious entrepreneur with a vision of electric cars to the visionary who would one day send people to Mars, his life had been a series of never-ending quests. But as he stood in this moment, he realized something profound: the journey was never about the destination. It was always about the people he had met along the way, the teams he had worked with, and the future he had envisioned, not just for himself, but for humanity. Elon had spent countless hours thinking about what humanity's future would look like. A multiplanetary civilization, free from the confines of Earth, was no longer a distant dream. SpaceX was on the verge of making space travel accessible to more than just astronauts. The Starship was ready, and the first civilian missions to the Moon and Mars were on the horizon. But even as the reality of these achievements settled in, Elon knew that true progress meant more than just launching rockets into space. It meant creating a future where everyone had the chance to thrive, where technology and innovation could be harnessed to solve the world's most pressing issues. Climate change, resource scarcity, and inequality, these problems wouldn't disappear just because humanity had figured out how to live on Mars. These were problems that had to be tackled here, on Earth, first. The idea of Earth as a fragile, interconnected system was always on Elon's mind. As much as he believed in the necessity of space exploration, he had come to realize that the future of humanity was inextricably linked to the future of Earth. The efforts to colonize other planets were not meant to escape our home, they were meant to ensure our survival and create new possibilities for generations to come. We have to preserve Earth, even as we reach for the stars, Elon often said to those around him. It wasn't just a catchphrase. It was a philosophy that had guided him throughout his career. Despite the grand accomplishments that had defined his public persona, Elon remained acutely aware of his own humanity. The grueling days, sleepless nights, and sacrifices had taken their toll on him. He had lost relationships, endured personal hardships, and faced criticism from all sides. The weight of leadership had often felt like too much to bear. Yet, through it all, he had kept moving forward. He found solace in the work, in the mission, and in the belief that the future could be better than the present. And now, as he reflected on it all, he understood something important: progress was not linear. It was a journey filled with detours, setbacks, and recalculations. But every setback had shaped him, every failure had taught him something crucial. In a way, failure was not the opposite of success, it was an essential part of it. Elon had learned to embrace failure, because it was only through failure that the most important breakthroughs came to light. Every failed rocket launch, every rejected idea, every moment of doubt had been a stepping stone toward the ultimate goal. As Elon looked out over the complex, his thoughts turned to the next generation. The young minds working alongside him, those who were now shaping the future of the world with their own groundbreaking ideas. These were the ones who would carry on his legacy, building on the foundation he had laid. The vision he had started with was much bigger than himself. It was about inspiring others to reach for something beyond their current limitations. Whether it was through sustainable energy, advancing artificial intelligence, or creating a new civilization on Mars, the goal had always been to push humanity forward, to show what was possible when people dared to dream big and work relentlessly to turn those dreams into reality. One of the most powerful experiences for Elon over the years had been watching the growing global movement toward sustainability and environmental consciousness. It wasn't just about creating electric cars or solar power, it was about changing the collective mindset. The world was waking up to the importance of sustainability, and the role technology could play in addressing the climate crisis. For Elon, this was one of his proudest moments. The realization that he had played a role in igniting this global shift. Even as Tesla and SpaceX continued to make headlines, Elon believed that the true impact of his work would only be fully realized in the decades to come. His focus was not just on innovation for innovation's sake, but on building a better world for future generations. As he prepared for another busy day, Elon's phone buzzed with a reminder for an upcoming board meeting at Tesla. It was a meeting he had been looking forward to, as it marked a milestone in the company's efforts to move toward fully sustainable energy systems. But before he left his office, he took a moment to jot down a few thoughts in his notebook, thoughts that had been swirling in his mind for days. "What will our legacy be?" he wrote. "Will we have done enough to make sure humanity thrives for generations? Will we have created the systems, the values, and the culture that will ensure future leaders are equipped to face the challenges ahead?" Elon paused, his pen hovering above the page. Legacy, it was a word that had become central to his thoughts recently. It wasn't just about the tangible things he had built. It was about the values he had instilled, the inspiration he had sparked in the hearts of millions of people around the world. It was about creating a culture of exploration, innovation, and sustainability that would endure long after he was gone. The moment felt significant. As he walked out of his office and into the heart of SpaceX's bustling headquarters, Elon Musk realized that his work was far from over. There was still so much to be done, and there were countless challenges ahead. But he also understood something crucial: humanity's journey was just beginning. In the end, the true measure of progress wasn't in the rockets launched or the electric cars on the road, it was in the hope, the inspiration, and the potential that had been ignited in the hearts of people all over the world. And that, Elon mused, was a legacy worth striving for. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?